Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh my goodness. I am so excited for everyone to be here. This makes me so happy because this is technically my first official book club live stream for the month of December. So this is amazing. And I'm so glad that I get to have my fave book podcast on.
Aww.
I love your guys' podcast. This makes me so happy that you guys agreed, especially because we can talk about it a little later. I already messaged Grace about it, but if everyone wants to introduce themselves.
Sure. I'm Sarah. I'm from the Book Hose podcast.
I'm Grace, and I'm also from the Book Hose podcast.
Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Kelly.
I'm Shruti. I'm also from the Book Host podcast, and I am not showing my face because, as we established on our podcast, I am a teacher, and no one needs to see my face. So.
Hi, Tiffany. Oh, hello.
Hi, Tiff.
I need to know if Laura's in chat because, Laura, if you're here, you need to say so.
Yeah.
So that we can tell you happy birthday.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Hello, Internet. Thanks so much. We had a little bit of a delay, but it's fine. So December's book club pick was A Series of Unfortunate Events, the first book by Lemony Snicket, which is The Bad Beginning. And I picked this solely because I was telling Grace about how much I loved Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth, which was one of my favorite books of 2020 in this terrible year. That book was amazing, and it was very meta, and it reminded me a lot about how I love this book. And so I was like, what better to kick off a light horror themed sort of book club than what probably got me into weird stuff as a kid. So I think the first question that I have for you guys is what are your memories of this? Because I'm sure we all have our own separate ideas and pre-notions about how we feel about the series from when we were younger. Who wants to go first? Yeah.
I'll go. I read The Series of Unfortunate Events for the first time when I was pretty young. I was early elementary school, so probably I don't know, 3rd grade or something like that. And it took me a long time to read them all because I wasn't very good at sticking with the series. So I'd read 2 books and then read a different series and then come back to it. So it probably took me a couple of years to get through the whole thing. But I didn't finish a lot of series when I was a kid, but I did finish this series because it was just so, I always found it really engaging, and it kept me on. It was one of the first, I guess, like I said, I didn't finish a lot of series, so it was one of the first ones to really suck me in and keep me from the edge of my seat and wanted me to keep me wanting to read more. So, it was, I don't really have a ton of other memories about it, but reading it again, this is probably I want to say the 5th time I've read this first book. I just appreciate it every single time in a new light, especially reading it now as an adult, just how good the writing is. And I can definitely see why I loved it as a kid and why so many other kids love it, and adults too.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to put just some chats up.
How dare she?
This book. Wait,
Kelly.
Tiffany. I did read a few as a Slimed Summer, but not this one.
That's so interesting, though, that if you would have read other ones, but not the first one.
Yeah, the first one. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember this was kind of, I think, my first series that I read in full, even before the classic Harry Potter, as everyone else has. But for me, I think this is the first one I remember being super invested in as a kid. And I was reading it as the books came out too, for the second half of the series. So it was I was growing up with them, and so that was cool. So that's kind of my main takeaway from it is it was a bit of my childhood growing up with them.
Yeah, I don't know. I know I read them as a kid. I feel like I was 9, and I also feel like I remember the last one coming out. So I probably read them leading up to the last one, probably around the same time that I was reading Harry Potter and all that, and I was very, very into them. And then recently, like a few years ago, I read them again when the show was coming out, the last season of the show was coming out. And I was like, man, these hold up. They hold up. They are good books.
Yeah, so I remember reading them in tandem with Harry Potter. Like Harry Potter was like my tried and true back in the day because I think magical escapism is, super great for someone like me who had a lot of trouble like socializing and like that idea of like found family, like really like before I knew that I liked that show. I think it's like it really resonated with me when I like binged all the Harry Potter books as a kid, and then read the last couple of ones as they released. But I remember distinctly that the series of unfortunate events was the first series where I like felt obsessed with like the mystery, the thrill, the like what's gonna happen next, like legitimately like keeping me on my toes while always having these really weird and like sometimes like legitimately like scary concepts like getting kidnapped, in later books, like never having adults that like believed you, which is very common theme, and just like all of these like terrible, terrible things happening to these kids. And I'm just like, oh my God, like I wish I could have been their friends, which is interesting because it's like I didn't want to be friends with Harry and all of them. Like I wished I was there, and then had my own things going on. But with them, I was like, I wish I could have like held the Baudelaire children like near and dear. Let's see what chat is going on. Oh my gosh. There was a show. There was a movie and then there was a television show.
Yes.
Yes, on Netflix.
It's a really good show. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about it, but it's true to the books, in my opinion.
Kelly, you just need to leave and then read all the books and then watch the TV show and then come back and watch this.
I went to Hogwarts 10.
Yeah, I think most people would.
Yeah.
Unless it was Darren Criss Harry Potter from a Harry Potter musical. But even then, he's on thin ice. So I reread this because for like the last half of this year, because I've been really into like gothic horror again. And I would go so far as to say that my love for gothic horror has probably spawned from this book, because reading this, like, this is tragic. And it's not like supernatural or anything that's like typical of gothic horror, but there's just like this innate like misery and sadness that's just in this book that makes me like want to cry. And as an adult, I'm like, dang, this like sucks.
Yeah.
So I just what were your initial thoughts rereading this?
I guess the thing that always strikes me the most about these books is the writing style, because Lemony Snicket manages to write in a way that he's able to use big words and all that stuff, and he explains it to the reader without talking down to them. He just I love the way he adds in the asides where he's like, this word, which here means this, rather than, just throwing it in and not explaining it so it's difficult for kids or anything. And like I said, even reading it now as an adult, it doesn't take away from my enjoyment because it just fits with the flow of his narration so well. So for me, that's one of the things that's always stuck out about the books. And then, like you said, just how sad it is. Like, I forget how sad these books are, even though it's called A Series of Unfortunate Events. But like, I was listening to the audiobook, like, man, they're in a bad situation with like, because I don't know, if you think about it, if you're just reading it, you're just like, whatever. But if you actually think about it, it's like, man, these are kids. They just lost their parents. They're living with this horrible man who's, hitting them and yelling at them and making them do all these terrible chores and stuff. It's just, yeah. And I don't know. It's weird to say, like, forget how sad they are because it's called A Series of Unfortunate Events. But like, I do, because I have such good memories of the books.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's like, it's not just in the one book. Like, it's bad enough that bad things happen to them in the one book, but there's 13 books of bad stuff happening to them over and over again. And it's a bummer. It is a bummer.
Mm-hmm. I think what I realized about myself when I was rereading this was that, because I haven't reread the books since the first time I read them. Like, I don't remember ever rereading them. But there are still scenes that, like, stick in my brain, which is kind of incredible considering how long ago I read them. But also, I realized that, like, I'm less jaded now. Like, I think I was more upset reading them now than I was as a kid. because I think because I have more context of like the world in general. So I was like, wow, this really sucks for these kids. When I was little, I was like, oh, this is sad, but I didn't really like fully understand how unfortunate it really was.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as we start talking about it, so for people who don't know, basically this is a story of three children, Klaus, Violet, and their infant sister, Sunny Baudelaire, and they quickly lose their parents in a fire. And we don't know the context at all about their deaths until later on in the series. But all we know for now is that within their will, that their parents had instructed that they live with their relatives that are like closest, even if they are estranged relatives. So they're sent off to live with this man named Count Olaf, and it's just terrible for them. And one thing that really struck me upon this reading, because I've read it a couple of times in between, but I don't actually own them, and so my boyfriend, I kept telling him that I wanted to read it for so long that he went out and he thrifted a bunch of them. So I have like books 1, 2, and 3, 5. No, 1, 2, 3, 7, 10, and 13. So I'm missing a couple, but
That's a good selection.
Yeah.
yeah,
That's a good one.
like he thrifted a bunch. So like I'm planning on rereading this whole series in 2021, and they never have a chance to grieve the death of their like parents in this book, and I just don't know why, but I just thought that was terrifying. I don't know how you guys felt about that.
Yeah, I definitely thought that too, because there was a couple lines when they're at Mr. Poe's house before they go to Count Olaf's, where he just says, they just stated they didn't want to get out of bed in the morning or whatever. And I think it stuck out to me, especially reading it this time, is like the same thing. Like, wow, they just were really kind of thrown into this. They didn't have time to grieve.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a deeply unfortunate, I guess, is the word of the day for this. And it was weird because like I have watched the adaptation film quite a lot. I love Jim Carrey. So like in my head, it's like I'm reading it through the narration of Jude Law, and then I see Count Olaf as Jim Carrey. But as I was reading this book, I realized that like I think the over dramatic like absurdity of Jim Carrey's Olaf actually kind of like is like a caricature. And like while I think that this book is definitely hinting at like the absurdity of life and how tragic it can be, in a very like light Shakespearean for children kind of way, I think back to Neil Patrick Harris, Count Olaf, and I think when I was reading this book, I think I actually saw Neil Patrick Harris as Count Olaf as opposed to Jim Carrey, because I think Neil has a bit more, nuance to his Count Olaf as a like bravado, which I thought was interesting. Which, Sarah, you said that you listened to the audiobook and it was narrated by who?
By Tim Curry.
Tim Curry, Mr.
Yeah.
Frankenfurter. Interesting.
Yes,
I love that.
I need to shout out this audiobook, by the way, because I just checked it out because I knew we were doing this and I wanted to make sure I reread it and everything. And
Did you get it from Hoopla?
Yes, I did get it from
Hoopla.
Yeah,
me too.
My library has it. Oh.
Hi, Dan.
And 2014. Kelly, do you not remember?
That was not that long ago, Kelly.
But yeah, I didn't expect the audiobook to be so good, but I'm pretty sure it's like full cast. And because they had like specific voices for each character and everything. They had like background music when there was like a train or something. They had it in the background. They had like when Sunny was crying, they had like crying in the back. Like it was crazy. I felt like I was listening to a movie. It was so good. And it was nominated for, or Grace and I were just talking about this, it was nominated or won a Grammy or something. So I didn't know.
Cool.
Yeah, I didn't know that was possible for audiobooks. So
I always say audiobooks should get Grammys too when I'm like getting a good one. And now they do, which is nice to know.
Yes, this one deserves it.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh my goodness. Hello, Tori. I've heard the audiobook is great.
It's phenomenal.
We love that. Apparently, Kelly blocked it from her memory. Oof.
Oof.
2019 was 15 years ago. I don't believe we're not remembering.
That's
valid.
fair. Very fair.
Valid. Very valid.
I'll let it slide, Kelly.
And okay, so we talked a little bit about the writing style, but I want to talk about that a little bit more because as an adult, what if like one of my favorite books was Plain Dead Heroines, and it was very like meta context. There's a lot of asides and a lot of like talking to the audience, and then like I really love Shakespearean soliloquies because like they kind of like bode this like tiptoeing between like talking to the audience and like being like metatextual within like the context of their plays. And my favorite book is House of Leaves, which is like I have the like I don't know if you can see it, but I have like the dedication page tattooed on me, which says like this is not for you. And the prologue is basically a don't read this book. It's terrible. It's tragic. It's very sad. And I was unsure of how when I read this intro, because I remember it being like, this is a tragic book. You don't want to read it. If you don't want to read about unfortunate things happening to orphans, then like put this book down. And I was kind of afraid that like because I've read so much other literature that features that I would find this to be I don't know, like cheapened. But I think Lemony Snicket, it has such a unique voice, and I'm so sad that we don't get more like books from him, because like I legitimately think that not only as a children's writer but just as a writer in general, he has crafted tone and atmosphere and engagement so well.
Yeah. I feel like these books are kind of the blueprint. Like anytime I read a book that's like put this book down or like something along those lines, I'm like, oh, they're pulling a Lemony Snicket. Like I feel like this is the blueprint.
And I think what I really love, yeah, what I really love about his writing too is that like there are a lot of time, like he uses the like callbacks a lot, like referring to himself. Like I think there was one part where in the narration he talks about figuratively versus literally, and then later on like there's a whole line where Klaus actually says, you know, figuratively, you're going to actually do this figuratively, not literally. I mean, you're not going to do it figuratively, you're actually going to do it literally. And I'm like, I like those callbacks of like people get to see, you know, the words used like in actual context, like Sarah mentioned earlier. But also just like that whole idea of like, it's a kid's book, but you're still getting that like atmosphere of horror in a way. So I understand why Grace likes it so much.
Yeah,
really
and
funny.
I like your use of the word engagement, because that's really what gets me about his writing too. It's so engaging with the reader.
Mm-hmm. I know that we get a lot of the eye stuff, but we don't really get the exploration of I don't feel like this is like too much of a spoiler in sense of like I think you learn about it literally like the next book pretty early on. But there's like this grander conspiracy thing going on within all of these books, and there's an organization that their parents used to belong to, and it's interesting to have this retrospect because like Shruti was mentioning, it's like she said she hadn't reread it in a while, but there are things that she like remembers vividly, and like I remember distinct scenes like very vividly in my head, especially from like the last couple of books, and seeing how this first book sets up the entirety of this 13-book series is like mind-boggling to me, because I feel like everything is here, like all of the footwork and groundwork is like here, where it's like, and I just found that really jarring. I guess it's because like I'm older now and reading it, I'm just like, oh my god, like I don't think I've ever reread a series where I've looked at the first book and being like, yeah, I know where that's going. And I don't know if any of you also experienced that.
Oh, absolutely.
It is like slow in the beginning. I remember like it's not until the 5th book that like the organization even gets brought up and all that stuff, but he is sprinkling it in, like he's doing it really slowly and really subtly, and it's very cool. I agree.
So I haven't read the other books obviously recently. Is the Molotov cocktail come back later on? I feel like it did. There's a couple things that are like mentioned here that I was like, I wonder if these comes back, but I can't remember if they did or not.
I don't think so, but I don't
remember. That might be a little too specific.
Because that was one and specifically that like jumped out at me. Like this is something that would come back. Like if knowing Lemony Snicket and knowing his writing style, that's something that would come back many books later. So that's why I like noted it. But again, like I think it, like you guys mentioned, it does a really good job of like setting up the whole like even at a very basic level, even though it doesn't get into the conspiracy and stuff of it, you still get the idea of, okay, this is what the series is going to be about.
Mm-hmm. I could have sworn the organization stuff was so much earlier on, but maybe I am just remembering the last half of the series, because that's where most of my memories are from.
Yeah. Well, the last half is when like all the wild stuff goes down.
Yeah, it's absolutely bonkers. And so that brings me to characters. When I was a little kid, I read so much that I think I just automatically imprinted with like Klaus, and I was like, yeah, me bitch, same. Like, I love you. Like, I will also just sit in my parents' giant library and read for days and pretend I'm smarter than everyone. But reading this, I think my appreciation for Lemony Snicket as a writer completely derives from how he wrote Violet. And before I talk about what I'm going to say about that, I want your inputs first.
So I feel like probably I'm more like Klaus, but when I was a kid, anytime there was a girl character, I was like, that's my favorite character. So Violet was always my favorite character, and I really like her now as an adult too. Like, she's the older sister.
Mhm.
I'm an older sister. She's an inventor. I'm not an inventor, but I still appreciate that. And she's a good character. I really like her a lot. She's smart. She's smart.
Mhm.
I think when I read it the first time, Klaus was my favorite. Like you had mentioned, like I really related to reading a lot and just that whole aspect of it. But rereading this book, I was like, I really appreciate Violet. Like, obviously, Klaus has awesome moments in this book as well, but like Violet, I think really stood out to me just because she was a smart girl, and that's just not something we see a lot in things nowadays. So this was really awesome to see. And I also actually had an appreciation for Sunny, especially knowing how things go later on. It was like, it's really nice to see her, like, yes, she's a baby and she like barely speak, but like she still gets moments of like, and you're like, oh, this is really fun. So I don't know, I appreciated her too.
Yeah, I kind of similar to Grace. When I was a kid, I kind of like gravitated just towards any girl character, and also because she was an older sister, I'm an older sister too, so and I definitely gravitated towards that when I was younger as well. And yeah, I agree. She was really written well in this book, and I think I don't remember the rest of the series super well, but from what I remember, her character arc throughout the series just gets better and better with each book. And similar to how you were saying, hints at the plot are sprinkled throughout this book, I can see like kind of hints of like where her character development's going to go for the rest of the series in this book too.
Mm-hmm. It was actually really interesting because I had come into this and like I'd read it a couple of times previously, like high school-ish, but not necessarily like out of college, and still really loved Klaus, but I was afraid that I think as a lot of people would be, that like maybe Violet would suffer from the like, because given the nature that she's very good at utilizing tools and making things, and she has a very like mechanically like trained brain, and like she's every time she's thinking of making invention, she like ties her hair up in a ribbon. And I was really afraid there's going to be this like I'm not like other girls like vibe upon rereading that I would get that I wouldn't have remembered or have even any notion of as like a child. But it's so interesting to me that Lemony Snicket wrote a female character that is just smart, inventive, and her smarts is like, it's never gendered. It's never like, oh, Violet is smart for a girl. It's just like Violet's just like that. And it's similarly Sunny and Klaus, they're just like that. They're just people, they just exist. And I think that's so beautiful. And I don't know why. I'm like really emo about it. I'm just like, wow, they're just kids and they have things that they're doing and that they're like, that's crazy. Because I feel like younger like adult fiction can get really tropey because they're trying to like sell these ideas of like identity or loss or grief or whatever, but they're not consumed by any of those like bigger ideas, which is interesting. It's like it's like the way that he writes, it makes me think of like, you know, those like Russian dolls where it's like big things and then there's like smaller and smaller and smaller, and he starts off with like, these are your characters that you'll fall in love with, and then here's everything that's terrible that happens to them, and this is how they work within those frames. And I just think that's so cool to like think about.
Yeah. That's a good analogy.
Yeah, that is a really good analogy. And I also really liked, on that note, with Violet especially, how, yes, she's the smart girl who's like allowed to just be smart and be herself, which is really awesome. And I also really liked, and this is kind of what I think Sarah and Grace were getting at, is she's also allowed to just have a heart and like care about her siblings and like put that. And obviously, there's things about since she's the oldest, she's going to have more responsibility and like about how her parents have told her that. But I enjoyed that, like, it wasn't like she was smart and then just, that was her only characteristic either. She was allowed to be multifaceted. She was allowed to have different, different aspects to her personality.
Laura is here now, apparently. Sorry.
I know.
Hello, Laura. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yes, okay.
Birthday.
Happy birthday. Everyone in chat, tell Laura, our friend, listener of the Book Code Pod, host of her own podcast, House of Anubis, in case you didn't know. Just generally wonderful human. Happy birthday.
Yay.
I like this comment in particular. This comment gives me joy.
Oh. This is a Quigley Stan live chat.
Birth. Yes, actually interesting. It's a vulnerability, I think, is a really good word to describe Violet. Violet and vulnerability. And speaking of which, I think this is a good transition into talking about Count Olaf. Comic mischief, comically evil caricature of a man, terrible, terrible human being. It's really hard for me to think about my feelings about Count Olaf because I have so many like conflicting like Jim Carrey, Neil Patrick Harris like in my head, and I don't know if that like happened to anyone else upon reading this.
So I can say no because I haven't watched the TV show and I haven't watched the movie in years either. So I feel like I was reading this and it was truly like, yes, I remembered when I was a kid what was going on, but I felt like I was going in blind as an adult into this. So while I was reading it with Count Olaf, I was like, oh, yes, I remember he's terrible. Because that's really what this book is about establishing how terrible he is. And I know in the back of my mind that, yes, there's more layers to him. Yes, there's more like motivation and all of that. But it was good to like read this and go into it like, okay, yes, he is a terrible human being who is just after money. And I think that was kind of my mindset going into it. Because I didn't have to worry about all these other, the actors and all of that. Because I haven't seen the TV show and I haven't watched the movie in years.
Yeah, and I think for me, having watched both the movie and the TV show, I don't know, because I know Neil Patrick Harris is an actor and I know Jim Carrey is an actor. So the book Count Olaf seems way more sinister to me. I don't know if it's just, but he was reading this book, I was like, whoa, this dude is scary. Whereas the TV show, he's like scary, but in like a less scary way, like.
Yeah, I feel like Jim Carrey and Neil Patrick Harris are also like very comedic people. So they obviously bring that to the role on both counts. And then I feel like Neil Patrick Harris also like they made the TV show very musically, so that also made it more lighthearted. But Book Olaf is like much scarier and sinister. I agree.
It was hard for me at first to kind of like, okay, like this, like put this in this like pocket of my brain. Okay, like okay, put Jim Carrey over there, and let's just focus on Book Olaf because I do want to talk about like the innate sinister like nature of Olaf, and it's terrifying because like this is a villain who has absolutely no like backstory. Like we do not know like who he is, why he is like this. He just exists as this terrible person. In the TV show, he's like scary, but innately burst into a song.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I guess it's a checklist. So for people who don't know, he is somehow the person that the Baudelaire orphans get handed off to by just Mr. Poe and his just bumbling ways, I guess is the best way to say it. And Olaf immediately is very cold to the children. There is an instance of like he assaulted Klaus at a point. Concocts this plan to make Violet a child bride, which is so illegal and it's so strange that like the children deal with this as like, oh my god, like he's trying to marry Violet. This is terrible. But like I love that Lemony Snicket writes it, that they don't really understand. Like they know it's bad, and that he's trying to like obviously steal the Baudelaire like fortune, but they're like, as an adult, it's like, I understand why this is deeply terrifying and actually awful and so just like crazy, but like they don't realize that. And I think that's also something that Lemony Snicket does really well, is that like he understands the horrors of like adults and children, whereas like he still writes his characters to be very like organic within their own world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just I had a really hard time kind of consuming this, because I was just like, wow, like this is so much. It's so heavy, because we deal with the topics of grief, we deal with this kind of just like evil person, and it all kind of just keeps going downhill. It's like we're reading about a car crash just inevitably waiting to happen. And I think that's it goes again to his writing style, is that type of tone and atmosphere is so well crafted that you can't like stop reading. I blew through this. I don't know how quickly you guys read this, but I blew through it.
It was pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read it this morning in like a couple hours. But also, I really like that point about how like we as an adult understand more about how terrible this is than we didn't as a kid. And I think that's also getting back to hi Laura.
Bye, Laura.
But I think it goes back to how, in a way, I felt more upset and more like not cringing at times, but just like deeply like hurt. Whereas I didn't feel that as a kid, because I just didn't understand as much why this was so terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things
a cat.
Oh my
She
goodness.
just jumped up there. Hi. This is Pepper.
Hi, Pepper.
Hello.
So sweet.
Okay, you can continue. Sorry to interrupt. I was just
No, she's so cute. One of the things that struck me this time was kind of like you were saying, when he said, like, when they found out that he was trying to marry Violet, they just kind of took it in stride, almost like they were like, okay, this is just another thing we need to like stop him from doing, and then we'll get out of here and we'll be fine. It wasn't like, whereas as an adult reading it, I'm just like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah.
And it's kind of, he calls her pretty a lot too. Pepper's thoughts on the book.
Clearing minds would like to know. Okay, well, here's my mic, so I'm gonna move that real quick. We're gonna have a brief intermission. Just to wait a second. What would you like to say? What would you like to say? She said she likes it.
Good. You can stay. Yeah, I feel like, and there's also a part where Violet's like thinking about the I don't know what I'm saying. Thinking about like having to wake up next to him in bed or something like that.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, this is gross. And it's also interesting because like towards the end of the book, you learn more about Olaf. And I'm not saying you forgive him, but he becomes more interesting. So, and
Right.
it's
but
hard.
If you forgot all of that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's hard to reconcile it all together.
Mm-hmm. And I think with Olaf, I think he's a really good foil to literally every other adult character, because this is something that always I kept with me a lot with the series of unfortunate events, and particularly this first book, the notion that like adults don't just because you're older doesn't necessarily mean that you're wiser, and also that adults don't necessarily look out for the best interest of children. And it's, as someone who has like been fairly independent for myself a lot, and who has like either tried to tell authority like in college settings, like, hey, this thing is happening, hey, this makes me genuinely feel unsafe, like, hey, like this person is causing like harm, and like people just ignore you because it's like, well, there's no visible things happening to you, so like just learn your place in the world. And I feel like that idea is like still in this first book, and I don't know, it's very insightful.
It is, and it's also like it shows like how evil, like obviously Count Olaf is evil because he's actively doing bad things to them, but just as evil is like Mr. Poe and all the adults they try to go to for help and just won't do anything about it. So like their inaction is just as evil as Count Olaf's action.
And just another thought I had was I really liked the line about how Count Olaf is like cruel and terrible and all of that, but most importantly, he's clever. And I thought that was a really good point of making out. Yet the reason why he's such a good villain is because he's not stupid. He's not like bumbling there and just he's not Mr. Poe who's just clueless. He's clever and he's able to make these plans and these schemes and stuff like that. Which is why the Bloodlayers have to keep fighting him back, but. So I just thought that was an interesting, like a good thing to have as a smart villain, because otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah,
yeah.
The thing that struck me was like when they go to Mr. Poe for the first time, and they're like, "Oh my God, like Olaf hit Klaus, like this is unsafe. This is not. We can't live here." And Poe is like, "Well, technically, as like a parent, as your guardian." He can raise you and discipline you however he wants, and you simply have to like live like that. And I think that's just so terrifying as just like understanding as an adult, just how like domestic abuse like households live, and like how it's like really hard for like kids who are suffering from like parental abuse, how like awful that it is. Because I don't know if like maybe Shruti experiences, but like I have friends who are like guidance counselors who like will talk about how like, oh, it's obvious that things are bad at home for children, and like even if kids tell like adults, it's like such a process to get them to safety, and it's like it's really horrible. And like reading this, I when I think about like the real world implications and like what if this family, like what if the what if the orphans experience this like today in 2020, and like unfortunately I feel like this scenario would completely play out, because like I think Lemony Snicket really grounded this, like it's not like Shruti was saying, like it's a clever evil man who knows his way around and is trying to do as much harm to these children to gain money, which is like maybe such a simplistic goal, but somehow it's so effective.
And I think it gets at the true evil. I mean, because what you were saying, the true evil in the world isn't necessarily the bad people. Like there are obviously bad people in the world who do bad things, but it's also like the systems in place don't necessarily usually make it easier for people than for like to allow people to like get help and to get justice. And I think, yeah, I've luckily had the fortune of never having to deal with a situation like this in teaching, but there have been students, who you can tell things are not going well, and as a mandated reporter I have to like legally say something, but like there are some times where if you don't have proof, like they can't do anything about it, right? If you don't have like photographs, or if the child doesn't want to say anything, like you can't do anything about it. And I think that's where the systems, and I think that's kind of what the book and the whole series is about, is like sometimes it's not necessarily the Count Olaf in the life, it's the systems around it that are really what's very unfortunate.
Yeah, and I think this is a common theme in a lot of children's literature, where it's like the adults seem, very unhelpful to the kids' situations, and I think that's because as a kid, you're just completely powerless pretty much to your situation, and you rely on adults for everything, and sometimes they let you down. And it's just, and this series definitely explores that in a different way.
Yeah. It's like that John Mulaney quote, "I am very small and I have no money." So I'm sure you can imagine the kind of stress I am under.
Oh my God, yes. Someone needs to make that meme, but it's the Bloodlayer children.
I'll do that after this.
I also think low-key this book may have instilled my fear of like carnies. Like
I mean
well, there's also they're at a carnival in the ninth as well.
The carnivorous carnivore, if I remember correctly. Yes. Or not carnivore, carnival. So alongside Count Olaf, he has just like these henchmen of adults that just work with him. And there is it's interesting the fact that he has a man with like a hook for his hand, and then someone that is wearing clownish makeup that does not appear to be a man nor a woman, and the language that is revolving around those characters, like the man with the hook for his hand, even though he's a villain, he's not, at least the way that I perceived it, I didn't feel like it was ableist in any sort of way. I mean, I guess aside from like him being categorized as a villain, I think, you know, many people could argue that. But even with like the clown person that doesn't have an identity, it was interesting to me that the like they them pronouns and just like referring to them as like, oh, I'm never going to use one pronoun or the other, but always say one who could perceived as androgynous.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was also really interesting. I don't know if anyone else picked up on that. I don't know if it's because this book is dated or why Snicket chose to write it like that. I have no conclusive like ideas, but I just thought that was interesting. It was written in 1999.
The TV show definitely like humanizes those characters more, I feel like. And the person who is neither a man nor a woman in the TV show is like woke as hell. And so I feel like it's better handled in the TV show. Not that it's badly handled in the books, but like they treat it with more respect in the TV show, I feel like.
Yeah, like I couldn't really discern how to like what to make of it besides like
Yeah.
this is interesting because I don't think it's like in your face terrible. I still think there are bad implications about the fact that these villains all seem to have like
Right.
issues. So that's like a problem, but like within that framework, the language around them is just interesting. Like it was like I guess it's just the 90s, and I guess that's just I don't know, like everything written before like 2012 is a
Yeah.
lot of the times.
Yeah, I do think because obviously there's like a purposeful way of none of them have names, right? Like they're all just characterized by their descriptions, and I do think that's probably one of the reasons why the author chose to, like, as an author, why you would choose to give them like these characteristics that are not seen as normal, like as not or ordinary in that way. But and so like to make them different so that they can stand out, and okay, now you have a description to talk about this person rather than giving them a name because you want them to seem faceless and nameless, and I think that gives them that air of spookiness or whatever.
Yeah. And in the TV show, they're less. Sorry, I keep bringing up the TV show. It's a good TV show, though. They're not really villains. I feel like in the TV show, like they're just zany, wacky side characters that are assisting the villain, but they're not villains. They're normal people.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I don't ever remember or recall if we ever get an explanation for why these people are following him around. I don't remember, but I think it's odd. But this leads me into I think the last adult character that we haven't brought up is Justice Strauss.
Yes.
Thoughts?
We stand.
Yeah.
So reading it. So again, I feel like I'm coming into this like as a brand new reader in a way. Like even though I know what goes on later on, I feel like I'm like a brand new reader. And reading this, of course, I'm just like the entire time I just want to shake her, right? Because you're like, she's right there.
Yeah.
She's great, but you're like, get it together. Like get it together. And I think that's like, especially at the end there when she's like, oh, I'm going to take the law over what I know is right. And I think that's like, and I think that's part of her character is that making that decision and making that distinction. So yeah, like I liked her, but I wanted to shake her, which is like going to be the theme with most adults in this series anyway, where you like at least like the ones who are quote unquote good, where you know they have their qualities, they have their moments, but then at the end of the day, sometimes they're just not going to be quite enough because they're just not going to make that extra step, and it's very frustrating. But that's the series for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she was kind of a symbol of hope for the kids. Like the whole time throughout the book, they're like, "Oh, maybe we could live with her. Maybe she'll help us." And then in the end, you know, because it's a series of unfortunate events, that's kind of crushed a little bit, and you know, they're taken away from her.
Mm-hmm. It's I think what Trudy had said about like it doesn't really matter if you see things that are like terrible happening to people. Like even like Justice Strauss understands that like the legalities that she has doesn't really have any bearing on like what she can do for these children. Like she doesn't have any legal jurisdiction to like do much for them or help them or aid them. And I think that's just like what's so sad, because I do think this is a recurring theme, that there are other people, other adults that witness these terrible things that happen to these orphans, and they're stuck because there are just only so much that they can do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It makes me very sad. And I think that I don't know what else we could cover, because I think that goes over most of the things. Except I did have the question. I mean, we've talked a little bit about the adaptations a while, but I guess with the perspective of just reading it, and like I guess if Grace or Sarah, or sure, do you want to talk about what do you like about the adaptations, or like if you're going to watch them, or any of your feelings for them in general?
I think the movie isn't a super faithful adaptation, but I do like love it. Like I watch it regularly. It's a good movie. It adds some stuff from the books that I enjoyed. And it's a good movie. And then the TV show like is a perfect TV show, a perfect adaptation. Literally no criticisms for the TV show whatsoever. It's a work of art.
I agree. The TV show is one of the best book to movie adaptations I've ever seen, just because it takes the feeling of the books, not just because of the narrator, but just the way it's filmed, the way the actors portray the characters, just everything is so, to me anyway, it feels so true to the books. And I just, as a reader, I appreciated that so much. And also just as a viewer of the TV show, it translated so well to TV. It worked out perfectly.
And the cast.
Yeah.
The cast. Like the kids are good, but
Oh
like
my gosh.
you've got Neil Patrick Harris,
Mhm.
you've got lots of other important people.
I think his name is Patrick, if we're thinking of the narrator.
Yes. Is it Patrick?
Yes.
Brewer? That sounds right. No, isn't that a character in Schitt's Creek?
I was just gonna say that.
I don't know. I don't even watch Schitt's Creek. The white lady from Get Out is in it too. I don't remember her name in real life, but she's
Maria
great.
Hill from Avengers.
Oh yeah, she's in it too. She's in it too.
Yeah. You said
What's
that, and I
his
was
name?
like, Robin Sparkles? From How I Met Your
Yeah,
Mother.
she's also in How I Met
Will
Your
Arnett. Will Arnett is in it. I forgot about them.
Smulders.
Mother.
That's
Mhm.
her name. Her name is Kobe Smulders.
Yes, that's her
Patrick
name.
Warburton. Thank you, Tiff.
Yes.
I
That's
knew it was-
the name
I knew
of
it was
the
Patrick.
funny of Lemony Snicket.
So I fun fact. So before I start I was rereading this book for today. But I've also decided that in 2021 I wanted to reread the rest of the series. And I asked Grace, because I know Grace did some weird thing where she was reading a book and then watched the episodes for that book, and then was reading a book and watching the episodes because the third season was coming out. So I asked her what was the best way to do this, and she was like, no, you should reread the entire series first. So I'll reread the entire series first, and then I will maybe finally watch the TV adaptation.
It's so good, and we shouldn't talk about it, so we won't. But I just want to vaguely say the thing with Will Arnett and Kobe Smulders
Mhm.
in the first season that they do with those characters. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was like I think about it every day. Every day I think about that. That was crazy.
I love it. I love it. All right. So I think this is okay. Don't come for me. Don't come for me. But I watched like the first half of this series, and then I never watched the rest of it. But I read about how they adapted it because I didn't have time to watch it. But what I watched, I had really liked. If that makes sense.
Mhm.
But I did come out of like what I did watch. I did come out with it, liking it a lot more than the Jim Carrey adaptation. And mind you, I just rewatched like half of that movie the other day, just like before I like read the book, and the music of it was very atmospheric. And I think the music of the movie is a lot better than the music in the show. But I think everything else in the show is like spectacular and magnificent. And you want to know why I found it out? I had to look at the composer, the person who did the music for the DreamWorks adaptation, or whatever company owns DreamWorks. They're the ones that made the movie. The person who did the soundtrack of Finding Nemo and American Beauty is the same person. Yep. And
I listened to that soundtrack very early as well.
Mind blown. I was like, But yes, I'm really excited because now I'm actually going to go back and watch the Netflix show. And I'm very excited about that because I think I'm going to just fall, especially because like I plan on reading the rest of the series in 2021. So that I'm very excited to have that as like one of my goals and to look forward to that.
I'm excited for you.
Yeah.
This is Grace's world. We're just living in it. Anyways, this is so much fun. I wish that I feel like 15 minutes. I feel like it was pretty good considering that this book is tiny.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's so small, and like it's even like smaller than most because the way that it's printed is like on small paper to begin with. So just like but yes, I'm so glad. Also, I think I'm gonna let you guys plug your stuff first before we completely go away. So whoever wants to go
I'll
first.
let you guys do Hadeless.
Okay, so we are the Book Hose. Also, we have an episode on a series of unfortunate events, and I believe it's called "If You're Looking for a Happy Ending, Put This Podcast Down Immediately." Something like that. You can figure it out. Our podcast is called The Book Hose. We are on Spotify and Apple and wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also follow us on Twitter at The Book Hose.
And on Instagram at BookHosePod.
So yeah, listen to our podcast, please.
Yeah.
Yes, everyone, please listen to them. They're one of my favorite podcasts. One of the only podcasts I will listen to upon regular dates. And with that, thanks so much for coming to the first book club episode. If you have any suggestions, if you want them to come back on my channel, and if they want to read something again with me, just let us know in the comments. Thanks so much for hanging out, and this was so much fun.
Yeah.
Fun. Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm so thankful you guys came. And with that, I think we should sign off.
Goodbye.
All right, bye. Bye.